There's a pattern that has destroyed every major empire in history. Not conquest, not invasion, not revolution. Economic collapse, specifically, currency collapse. And it happens the same way every single time. Rome, Spain, Britain. 3 empires that ruled the known world. 3 that fell, not by the sword, but by the mint. Every time the sequence is identical. Military overextension, unsustainable spending, currency debasement, inflation, loss of confidence, collapse. And every time, the people in power believed they were different, that they were special, that the old rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong. Every single time. Right now, in 2025, the United States is walking that same path, step by step, warning sign by warning sign. The only question is, are we at the beginning, the middle, or the end? This is the story of how empires destroy themselves from within, through their own money, through their own decisions, and through the illusion that prosperity can be printed forever. Let's begin where the pattern first appeared. Rome. At its height, Rome was the center of the world, a superpower stretching from the sands of Egypt to the hills of Britain. 60 million people lived under its rule. Its roads, aqueducts, and architecture defined civilization. And its currency, the denarius, was trusted everywhere. Introduced in 211 BC, the denarius was made of pure silver, about 4.5 grams. It held real value. When you held a Roman coin, you held wealth itself. People trusted it because they knew what it was. Silver that could be traded, melted, or stored. That trust built Rome's economy. But empires are expensive. Expansion costs money. Soldiers, supplies, administration, and defense. Rome's borders stretched further each century, and with every new province came a heavier financial burden. The empire was too large to sustain with taxes alone. And so, the rulers looked for another way to pay their bills. They found it in debasement, the quiet act of reducing the silver content in coins. Emperor Nero, ruling from 54 to 68 AD, was the first to cross that line. To fund his lifestyle and his armies, he ordered the mints to mix cheaper metals into the denarius, from 100% silver to 90%. A small change, easily hidden, but it changed everything. With the same amount of silver, the government could now mint more coins. 10 coins became 11. The empire had more money, but not more value. That's inflation. At first, it worked. The economy didn't collapse overnight. But Nero had started a chain reaction that no one could reverse. Each emperor after him followed the same path, shaving a little more silver off each coin. By the time of Emperor Caracalla in 211 AD, the denarius was half silver. By 265 AD, under Emperor Gallienus, it contained just 5% silver. A coin once made of pure silver was now almost worthless base metal with a thin silver wash. To the naked eye, it still looked the same. The emperor's face was still stamped on it. It still said, denarius. But its real value was gone. For Roman citizens, that change was invisible at first. But when they tried to buy grain, bread, or meat, prices had exploded. What cost 1 denarius a century earlier now cost 50. Farmers stopped selling food for coins. They demanded barter. Soldiers demanded payment in gold, not silver. And tax collectors couldn't collect taxes because the money itself was worthless. Rome's economy seized up like a dying machine. Trade slowed. Confidence vanished. The government tried to fix it with price controls and new laws. None of it worked. Because the problem wasn't merchants or greed. It was the money itself. Rome had destroyed its own foundation. It printed prosperity out of thin air and hoped no one would notice. But the markets noticed. The people noticed. And by the time the rulers realized what they had done, it was too late. The Roman Empire didn't fall in a day. Its borders didn't crumble all at once. But when its currency collapsed, the rest followed. Without stable money, the government couldn't pay its armies. Without armies, it couldn't defend its borders. Without defense, it couldn't survive. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire was gone. Not because of foreign conquest, not because of plague or famine, but because the empire's own economic engine had eaten itself alive. The pattern was born. Military expansion, overspending, debasement, inflation, collapse. Rome proved it. And every empire since has followed the same invisible script. Now jump forward 1,200 years. A new power rises, richer than Rome, armed with ships instead of legions, and wealth flowing from across the ocean. Spain. The Spanish Empire of the 1500s was built on unimaginable riches. Columbus had opened the New World. Cortés conquered the Aztecs. Pizarro took the gold of the Incas. And in 1545, Spanish explorers discovered a mountain made of silver, Cerro Rico in modern-day Bolivia. This wasn't just a mine. It was the greatest silver deposit in history. For over a century, it produced nearly half the world's silver. The mountain's riches filled Spanish ships, Spanish banks, and Spanish dreams. Spain's silver dollars became the first true global currency. They were accepted from Europe to Asia. The empire seemed untouchable. The more silver that arrived, the richer Spain became. But beneath the glitter was rot. Because there's a hidden rule of money. When everyone has more of it, each unit is worth less. As Spain flooded Europe with silver, prices began to rise. Slowly at first, then violently. What once cost 1 silver coin now cost 10. The value of silver itself was collapsing under its own abundance. And worse, Spain wasn't producing anything. It wasn't building industries or creating innovation. It was living off its colonies, spending easy wealth as fast as it arrived. Silver in, silver out. The empire became addicted to money it didn't earn. By the late 1500s, Spain's kings were drowning in debt. King Philip II inherited 36 million ducats in unpaid loans. Instead of reforming, he borrowed more, fighting wars against the Ottoman Empire, the Netherlands, and England. When he couldn't pay, he defaulted. In 1557, Spain declared bankruptcy, the first sovereign default in modern history. Then again in 1560, again in 1575, and again in 1596. 4 defaults in 40 years. Each time, trust evaporated. Lenders stopped lending. Interest rates soared. Spain began minting coins with less silver, replacing them with cheaper copper. People refused to accept them. The currency collapsed. By the early 1600s, the empire was hollow. The silver still flowed, but the wealth was gone. The government couldn't pay its soldiers or fund its wars. Inflation devoured the economy from the inside out. By 1700, Spain's empire was finished. The country that once controlled the world's gold and silver was broke. Not because others defeated it, but because it defeated itself through mismanagement and greed. The pattern had repeated. New empire, same fate. Massive wealth, overspending, inflation, default, collapse. And yet history still wasn't finished teaching the lesson. A new power would soon rise from the ashes. One built on trade, industry, and the strength of its currency. Its name was Britain. Britain, the empire that stretched across every ocean, every continent, and every time zone. At its peak, it ruled over 1/4 of the Earth's land, and 1/4 of its people. Nearly 500 million souls under a single crown. The British Empire wasn't just powerful, it was global. And at the center of that power was its money, the British pound sterling. For over 2 centuries, the pound was the world's reserve currency. It was trusted, stable, and backed by gold. 1 pound was as good as a fixed weight of metal, and that trust built an empire. Trade, investment, and industrial growth all revolved around it. Wherever the British flag flew, the pound followed. The gold standard kept everything in check. If you held a pound, you held a claim to real gold. No illusions, no empty promises. It gave Britain the confidence to borrow, to build, and to conquer. But like every empire before it, power demanded more power. More colonies, more ships, more soldiers, more money, and wars. The most expensive addiction of all. In 1914, when World War I began, Britain's national debt stood at about 650 million. By 1919, after 4 years of total war, it had exploded to $7 billion. That's more than a 10-fold increase in just 5 years. To pay for it, Britain had to abandon the gold standard. Gold convertibility was suspended, and the printing presses began to run. The pound was no longer backed by gold, only by government decree. For the first time in modern history, it became a fiat currency. Money by promise, not by substance. But the war had to be won, and so they printed. When the war ended, Britain tried to undo the damage. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, made a bold move. He returned Britain to the gold standard at its old pre-war rate. It was meant to restore glory, but instead, it crippled the economy. The pound was now overvalued, making British exports far too expensive. Factories couldn't compete. Unemployment soared. The government raised interest rates to defend the currency's illusion of strength, crushing growth even further. By 1931, Britain gave up. The gold standard was gone, this time for good. The pound was devalued, and global trust began to fade. Then came World War II, and with it, the final blow. Britain entered the war already deep in debt. By 1945, it owed more than 270% of its GDP, the highest level in its history. The empire had bankrupted itself to win the war. Cities were bombed, industries destroyed, and the economy was in ruins. But the real wound came at Bretton Woods in 1944, the conference that redesigned the global financial system. There, as the world rebuilt, one decision changed everything. The British pound was replaced as the world's reserve currency. Its successor, the US dollar. Britain fought to keep its status, but the outcome was inevitable. The United States had the gold, the factories, the resources, and Britain had only debt. The pound had fallen from the throne. The decline wasn't instant. It was slow, humiliating, and visible to the entire world. In 1947, Britain tried to make the pound freely convertible again. It lasted just 6 weeks before a run on the currency forced them to reverse course. In 1949, the pound was devalued by 30%. In 1967, it was devalued again. Each devaluation meant ordinary Britons lost savings overnight. Each one signaled that the empire's financial backbone had snapped. The currency that once ruled global trade was now fighting to stay alive. Meanwhile, the colonies began to fall away. India gained independence in 1947. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956. And when Britain tried to take it back, the world watched as the United States refused to help. It was the moment everyone realized the British Empire was finished. By the 1970s, Britain's economy was in chaos. Inflation hit 25%. Strikes shut down industries. The government went to the IMF for a bailout, the same kind of rescue once reserved for collapsing nations. The pound, once the symbol of stability, had become a warning. The empire that had ruled a quarter of the world lost it all. Not through invasion, not through revolution, but through debt and debasement. The pattern had repeated again, perfectly. War debt, currency debasement, loss of reserve status, devaluation, inflation, collapse. And out of the ashes of Britain's fall, a new superpower rose. One that promised it had learned the lessons of history. One that believed it would be different. That power was the United States of America. In 1944, as the dust of war settled, the world gathered at Bretton Woods and crowned the US dollar as the foundation of the global system. It was backed by gold, $35 per ounce. Every other major currency was pegged to it. The dollar became as good as gold. The system worked because people trusted America. It had the world's largest gold reserves, the strongest economy, and the only untouched industrial base after the war. The dollar's strength became the bedrock of global finance. Every central bank held it. Every trade deal relied on it. Every nation measured its value against it. But trust has a cost, and power always invites excess. As decades passed, America began to follow the same steps that doomed every empire before it. Wars in Korea and Vietnam, the Great Society welfare programs, military bases across the world, a lifestyle that demanded more spending than the nation could afford. By the 1960s, the math stopped adding up. Foreign governments, led by France under Charles de Gaulle, noticed the United States was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. They began calling America's bluff, demanding gold instead of paper. Shiploads of gold left Fort Knox. Confidence began to crumble. And in 1971, President Richard Nixon made the fateful decision that would define the next half-century. He closed the gold window. The dollar would no longer be redeemable for gold. Just like the denarius, just like the pound, it was now pure fiat, backed by nothing but faith. The modern financial era had begun. At first, it seemed like a miracle. The United States could print money without limit. Wars could be funded. Deficits could grow. Inflation could be managed. Or so they believed. To keep the dollar strong, America struck a deal with Saudi Arabia in the 1970s. Oil, the lifeblood of the world, would be priced and sold in dollars only. This petrodollar system created artificial demand. Every country that needed oil needed dollars. The illusion of endless strength was restored. But behind the illusion, the pattern had already restarted. The government spent more. The debt grew, and the printing presses ran again and again. In 1980, America's national debt was $900 billion. By 2000, it had risen to $5.6 trillion. By 2020, it hit $27 trillion. And today, in 2025, it's more than $36 trillion. A 40-fold increase in just 45 years. No empire in history has ever borrowed so much so fast. And every empire that tried, Rome, Spain, Britain, reached the same end. The pattern was moving forward again. The United States entered the modern age believing it had escaped the fate of every empire before it. It had the strongest economy, the most powerful military, and the most trusted currency on earth. The dollar was no longer tied to gold, but it didn't seem to matter. Trade continued, markets thrived, prosperity appeared endless. But history doesn't break its own rules, it only delays them. Once a currency is freed from tangible value, the cycle of debt and debasement begins again. The 1980s brought an age of consumption built on credit. The government borrowed, corporations borrowed, families borrowed. Debt became normal, even patriotic. Borrow now, pay later. That was the new American dream. The 1990s brought globalization. Factories moved overseas. The U.S. exported its manufacturing base and imported cheap goods. It felt like progress, but the trade deficits widened, and America became a nation that consumed more than it produced. Then came 2008, the financial crisis that should have been the warning. When banks collapsed and markets froze, the Federal Reserve created a new term, quantitative easing. It meant printing money without calling it printing. Trillions of dollars were created electronically. Money from nothing, injected into the system to stabilize it. They said it was temporary. It became permanent. The pattern from Rome to Spain to Britain was now visible in real time. Debt rising faster than income. Currency supply expanding faster than production. Trust maintained not through gold or discipline, but through illusion and belief. And when the COVID pandemic hit in 2020, that illusion was tested again. The U.S. printed over $4 trillion in just 2 years, more than in the previous century combined. Checks were mailed, bailouts were issued, and the printing presses roared louder than ever. Politicians promised it wouldn't cause inflation. They said the old rules no longer applied, but they always do. By 2022, inflation hit its highest level in 40 years, officially 9%, unofficially far higher. Food, rent, and fuel prices skyrocketed. The cost of living became unbearable for millions. The same story that ended empires was unfolding again, step by step. But inflation was only the symptom. The real disease was debt. In the 1950s, U.S. national debt was less than 50% of GDP. Today, it's over 130% and rising faster every year. The interest payments alone are now hundreds of billions annually, soon to surpass defense spending itself. And like Rome paying its legions, or Britain maintaining its empire, America can't stop spending. It has global commitments. Nearly 800 military bases in 70 countries, with a defense budget of over $800 billion a year. It's not a country anymore. It's an empire. And empires are expensive. Each war, each foreign intervention, each new promise to maintain influence adds another weight to the balance sheet. The United States has fought 2 decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan at a cost of over $8 trillion. The results? Political instability, wounded soldiers, and a national debt that will never be repaid. To fund it all, the government keeps borrowing, and the Federal Reserve keeps printing. Just like Rome diluted its silver, just like Spain flooded Europe with silver, America floods the world with dollars. Different tools, same outcome. But the problem isn't confined within its borders, because the US dollar isn't just America's currency. It's the world's reserve currency. When America prints, the world feels it. Foreign nations hold trillions in dollar reserves. Global trade runs on it. And when that trust begins to slip, the entire system trembles. In 2000, 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, it's 58% and falling. That may sound small, but in global finance, it's seismic. The world is quietly preparing for what comes next. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and new members, are building alternatives. They're trading in local currencies, creating new payment systems, buying gold, and reducing dependence on the dollar. China and Russia lead the charge. Central banks around the world are diversifying away from the greenback. They've seen this movie before, when Britain lost the pound's dominance after World War II. And they know how it ends. The cracks are already visible. America's credit rating has been downgraded. Its bond market shows signs of strain. And as the debt grows, the interest payments will soon consume everything else. The empire is reaching the same inflection point that destroyed Rome's economy, when maintaining the system costs more than the system can produce. But here's the danger unique to our time. Rome's collapse hurt Rome. Britain's collapse hurt Britain. But America's currency is the foundation of the global economy. If it falls, everything connected to it falls too. Trade, banking, investment. Every country that holds dollars, every market that prices goods in dollars, every company that borrows in dollars, they all share the same fate. That's why the end of the dollar's dominance wouldn't just mark the fall of one nation. It would mark the beginning of a new global order. And history tells us what comes next. After every collapse comes restructuring, a desperate attempt to rebuild stability on new terms. Rome moved from silver coins to barter economies. Spain's empire fragmented and faded into debt. Britain shifted to secondary power under the American-led system. When the US falls, the world will scramble to replace the dollar with something. A new currency system, perhaps digital, perhaps gold-backed, perhaps multipolar. But before that rebirth, there will be pain. Because when trust breaks, systems don't fade quietly. They implode. And the more globalized the system, the greater the explosion. Every warning light is flashing red. Inflation isn't under control. Debt isn't slowing down. Confidence is eroding. And yet the same illusion persists. That modern economics has rewritten the laws of history. It hasn't. The rules never changed. Only the players did. Rome's leaders said their empire was eternal. Spain's kings believed their silver would last forever. Britain's politicians thought the pound would never fall. America believes the same thing now. But the pattern has never lied. Every empire thinks it's different, right up until the moment it isn't. And that moment always comes faster than anyone expects. Every empire in history believed it had time. Rome thought it had centuries. Spain thought its silver would last forever. Britain thought its empire would never set. And the United States thinks the dollar will always rule the world. But time runs out the same way it always does. Slowly at first, then all at once. The pattern is absolute. It has 7 stages. And the United States is already deep into stage 5, sliding toward stage 6. Stage 1, dominance. The empire rises, its military unmatched, its currency trusted, its economy productive. Rome had its silver denarius. Spain had its silver dollar. Britain had its gold-backed pound. America has the dollar. At this stage, the currency is real, stable, and backed by something tangible. Gold, silver, trust. The empire expands. The world believes in its promise. Confidence is unshakable. Stage 2. Overextension. The empire grows beyond its means. It promises too much, fights too many wars, takes on too many obligations. Rome conquered continents. Spain ruled oceans. Britain colonized the globe. America built 800 military bases in 70 countries. The cost of power begins to outweigh the profit. Stage 3. Deficit spending. To maintain the illusion of strength, the empire borrows. It issues bonds. It raises taxes. It spends what it doesn't have. Rome borrowed from its provinces. Spain borrowed from bankers in Genoa and Flanders. Britain borrowed from its own citizens and the United States. America borrows from the future. Every year, the deficits grow, and soon, debt becomes permanent. Not a tool, but a way of life. Stage 4. Currency debasement. When borrowing and taxation are no longer enough, the rulers turn to the mint. Rome reduced the silver in its coins. Spain flooded the world with silver until it became worthless. Britain abandoned gold and devalued the pound. America prints digital dollars in endless supply. Different methods, same result. More money, chasing the same amount of goods. Stage 5. Inflation. The prices rise, the middle class weakens, the poor suffer most. Governments insist it's temporary, just as they always have. But inflation is never temporary. It's the visible symptom of a dying currency. In Rome, prices rose 50-fold. In Britain, 25% inflation gutted savings. In America, the official numbers hide the reality. But every grocery bill, every rent increase, every collapsing paycheck tells the truth. Stage 6. Loss of confidence. This is the point of no return. People stop believing the currency holds real value. They demand payment in something else: gold, goods, other currencies. The government insists everything is fine. The world quietly begins to move on. In Rome, soldiers refused denarii and demanded gold. In Spain, lenders refused royal bonds. In Britain, nations switched from pounds to dollars. And now, countries around the world are moving away from the dollar, trading in yuan, rubles, rupees, and gold. Confidence dies slowly, then suddenly, and once it's gone, no government can bring it back. Stage 7. Collapse. The empire can no longer fund itself. Debt becomes unpayable. Money loses credibility. The military weakens, social unrest spreads, and the system that once seemed unbreakable shatters under its own weight. That's how Rome fell. That's how Spain faded. That's how Britain shrank. And that's the path America is on. When trust in the dollar finally breaks, the consequences won't be national. They'll be global. Because the US dollar is the spine of the world's economy. Every central bank, every corporation, every financial market is built on it. If that spine snaps, the shock will be felt everywhere. Stocks, bonds, trade, savings, everything tied to the dollar's value will tremble. This isn't speculation. It's mathematical inevitability. You cannot borrow forever. You cannot print wealth. And you cannot escape the laws of value. History offers 3 outcomes, and none of them are painless. The first is controlled decline. Britain followed this path after 1945. It lost its empire, lost the pound's reserve status, suffered devaluations and inflation. But the country survived. It adjusted to being second tier, trading glory for stability. A slow, quiet descent rather than collapse. The second is chaotic collapse. Rome followed this path. When its currency became worthless, the empire fractured. Trade collapsed. Government failed. Society regressed. A dark age followed, centuries of chaos before recovery began. This is the worst outcome, but history shows it happens more often than we'd like to believe. The third is reset and restructure. A new financial system replaces the old one, sometimes backed by gold, sometimes by a new dominant power. Britain's collapse gave birth to the American-led system. The next collapse will likely give rise to something else, a multipolar world, perhaps digital currencies, perhaps China's yuan. Whatever comes next, the dollar's dominance will end the same way all reserve currencies do, through overconfidence and overreach. And what follows won't just be an economic event. It will be psychological, because for over 70 years, the world has believed in the dollar, not just as money, but as an idea. The idea that American stability guarantees global order. When that belief breaks, the world will need a new anchor. And in the void, chaos always rushes in first. You can already see the signs: countries hoarding gold, nations forming alliances outside the dollar system, energy trades bypassing US banks. Even inside America, faith is fading. People buying land, commodities, Bitcoin, anything that feels real. The system is shifting beneath our feet, and when it moves fast enough, it won't feel like a transition. It will feel like a collapse. The question is not if, but when. And the answer is written in the same story that has unfolded for 2,000 years. Rome debased its currency to pay its legions. Spain inflated its silver until it became worthless. Britain borrowed itself into decline. America prints trillions and calls it prosperity. Different centuries. Same arithmetic. Same ending. The fall of an empire doesn't begin with invasion. It begins with delusion. With the belief that this time, the rules don't apply. That they've invented a new kind of money. A new kind of empire. A new kind of exception. But history has never spared the exceptional. When the currency dies, everything built on it dies too. The markets, the armies, the prestige, the illusion. And when the illusion fades, the truth remains. You cannot print value. You cannot borrow forever. And no empire, no matter how powerful, can outlive its money. The pattern has spoken 4 times before. Rome, Spain, Britain, and now America. Everyone believed it was different. Everyone was wrong. And the pattern never lies.